The General by Dispatch here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on over 800 stations on Pacifica and NPR and low-power FM and college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations and both TV satellite networks, on Dish Network Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on Direct TV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as over 250 are. You can go to our website for transcripts of every show. We're also video and audio podcasting. I'm Amy Goodman as we discuss today's headline, More War. We're joined in Boston by Andrew Bacevich. He's a retired colonel and a Vietnam War veteran who spent 23 years in the U.S. Army. He's now a professor of history and international relations at Boston University and the author of The New American Militarism, How Americans Are Seduced by War, also The Limits of Power, the End of American Exceptionalism. Andrew Bacevich, welcome to Democracy Now! Start by responding to President Obama's announcement address at West Point Tuesday night.
Well, I think that we should view this as a squandered opportunity. President Obama came into office vowing to change the way Washington works. I believe that the Afghanistan decision really was a ready-made opportunity to do just that. He has chosen instead, I think, to bow to the way Washington works, to confirm the way Washington works, to insist that the pattern of behavior that defines our approach to national security, the pattern of behavior that defines our policies in the so-called Greater Middle East will continue during his administration. I think that's just deeply unfortunate.
President Obama made a point of rejecting any comparison between Afghanistan and Vietnam last night.
There are those who suggest that Afghanistan is another Vietnam. They argue that it cannot be stabilized, and we're better off cutting our losses and rapidly withdrawn. I believe this argument depends on a false reading of history. Unlike Vietnam, we are joined by a broad coalition of 43 nations that recognizes the legitimacy of our action. Unlike Vietnam, we are not facing a broad-based popular insurgency. And most importantly, unlike Vietnam, the American people were viciously attacked from Afghanistan and remain a target for those same extremists who are plotting along its border. To abandon this area now and to rely only on efforts against al-Qaeda from a distance would significantly hamper our ability to keep the pressure on al-Qaeda and create an unacceptable risk of additional attacks on our homeland and our allies.
President Obama at West Point last night. Professor Bacevich, your response.
Well, I think the president's unfortunately misreading the history with regard to Vietnam. I have to say, my sense is that the president has made this decision to escalate in Afghanistan with great reluctance. And it's worth recalling that Lyndon Johnson, I think, felt a similar reluctance about going more deeply into Vietnam. President Johnson allowed himself to be convinced that really there was no plausible alternative, that to admit failure in Vietnam would have drastic consequences for his own capacity to lead and for the credibility of the United States. And so he went in more deeply, and he went in more deeply persuading himself that he, his generals, could maintain control of a situation even as they escalated. And I think that may well turn out to be the key error that President Obama is also making. I mean, the very notion that we can ratchet up our involvement in Afghanistan and then state with confidence at this point that in 18 months we're going to then carefully ratchet our involvement back down seems to assume that war is a predictable and controllable instrument that can be directed with precision by people sitting in offices back in Washington, D.C. I think the history of Vietnam and the history of war more broadly teaches us something quite different. And that is that when statesmen choose war, they really are simply rolling the dice. And they have no idea what numbers are going to come up. And their ability to predict, control, direct the outcome tends to be extremely precarious. So from my point of view, the President has drawn the wrong lessons from his understanding of the history of war.
Professor Bacevich, last month Bill Moyers devoted an entire show to making the comparison between President Lyndon Johnson's decision to send more troops to Vietnam in 1965 and President Obama's current escalation in Afghanistan, although, of course, he said that the situations are different. This is an excerpt from Bill Moyers' journal featuring recorded conversations between President Johnson and Robert McNamara just before President Johnson announced the troop increase requested by General Westmoreland.
You know how far we're going to go? Do the Joint Chiefs know? And what human being knows? Now, we don't say that putting these people in is going to win, but we say if you don't put them in, you're going to lose substantially what you have. Yeah. Now, we don't want to promise to do it, but this is more of a holding action in the hope that through the monsoon they'll change their mind and time will play instead of being rash. We're trying to be prudent. Now, isn't that really what we're trying to do? No, not a damn human thinks that 50,000 or 100,000 or 150,000 are going to end that war. And we're not getting out, but we're trying to hold what we got. Can we really, without getting any further authority from the Congress, have all-out support or sufficient overwhelming support to work successfully, fight successfully? I really think if we were to go to the clerks and the McGoverns and the churches and say to them now, this is our situation. We cannot win with our existing commitment. We must increase it if we're going to win in this limited term we define, limited way we define win. It requires additional troops. Along with that approach, we are embarking upon or continuing this political initiative to probe for a willingness to negotiate a reasonable settlement here. And we ask your support under these circumstances. I think you'd get it from them under those circumstances. And that's a vehicle by which you both get the authority to call up the reserves and also tie them into the whole program. Now that makes sense.
July 28th, 1965.
I have asked the commanding general, General Westmoreland, what more he needs to meet this mounting aggression. He has told me, and we will meet his needs. I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately. Additional forces will be needed later, and they will be sent as requested.
That's President Johnson announcing an increase of U.S. troops to Vietnam back in July of 1965. That excerpt from Bill Moyers' journal on PBS. Professor Bacevich, as you listen to this conversation between the War Secretary McNamara and President Johnson, your thoughts?
Well, I saw the show when it ran. It's a brilliant piece of journalism. And just listening now to the exchange between President Johnson and McNamara, you can't help but be reminded of the failure of his advisors, the so-called best and brightest, people like Robert McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, who was the National Security Advisor, General Maxwell Taylor, who was at that time U.S. Ambassador to South Vietnam, all of whom I think, failed the president and failed the country as a result of their lack of creativity and lack of imagination in